Have you ever imagined hearing, from the very person you brought into the world, a phrase so harsh it feels like a blade piercing your chest? Before continuing, let me ask you something very simple, yet profoundly human. What would you do if someone you love looked you in the eyes and said, "You're a dead weight in here"? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover might surprise you in a way you might not even be prepared for. And if you've ever experienced rejection, ingratitude, or words that scarred your soul, take a deep breath, because this story speaks directly to you. The scene begins on a quiet, late afternoon. The small, ordinary house was immersed in that heavy atmosphere that only those who have lived with family tension know. The mother, a woman of frail appearance but with a huge history kept in her heart, was calmly folding some clothes, as she did every day. She always believed that small routines kept the heart strong, but that day, hearing hurried footsteps in the hallway, something inside her sensed that a new wound was about to be opened. The son entered the room without knocking. His face showed a mixture of irritation, impatience, and an almost cruel haste. Without measuring his words, without thinking about the impact, without imagining the force of the phrase he was about to utter, he blurted out, "You're a dead weight in here." Like this, dry, icy, definitive. And this is where I ask you again, do you know the weight a sentence can carry? Sometimes it's not the shouting, it's not the argument, it's not the conflict, it's the sentence that comes low, cold, calculated, and destroys everything inside. This kind of pain doesn't break the body, it breaks the spirit. And anyone who has a mother, anyone who has a heart, feels this pain. It's almost impossible not to feel it. But before we continue, I want you to think about this with me. Has it ever happened to you that someone belittled everything you've ever done? Has it ever happened to you that you were treated as if you took up too much space, as if your existence was a nuisance? If so, you'll understand this story in an even deeper way. And if it hasn't happened, I invite you to stay until the end, because understanding this is understanding something important about dignity, love, and boundaries. The mother, at that moment, stood completely still. She barely breathed. Her eyes welled up, but didn't break. It was as if the world around her had stopped, frozen, while she tried to reorganize within herself the meaning of that emotional blow. And when she finally raised her face, there was no anger, there was no scream, there was no immediate rupture. There was something more silent and much more dangerous. A decision that no one yet understood, but that would change everything from then on. And let me tell you something. What she did after that, nobody in the family even imagined. And when you find out, you'll probably understand why this story is affecting so many people. Because there is something powerful in starting over. There is something profound in the strength of a person who has lived so many decades and even wounded finds the courage to write a new chapter. And it is precisely this movement, this unexpected turnaround, this silent and painful response that you are about to see. Stay with me, because what comes next isn't the end. It's the beginning of something that will make you reflect on love, respect, and how life can change when someone chooses to stand up, even after being knocked down by the words of the one they love most. If this beginning has already moved you, leave a like here so I know I should continue bringing stories like this. And if you want to follow each new chapter that arrives here, take advantage and subscribe now. We still have a lot of profound things to experience together. Her name was Clara, a lady with a tranquil demeanor, one of those who carry stories in their eyes, but speak little about themselves. She had been over 70 for some years, but still woke up early, made her own coffee, and made a point of carefully making her bed, as if each detail were a silent reminder that it's never too late to maintain dignity. Clara was always independent, hard-working, and had a natural kindness that made any environment seem lighter. She grew up believing that life is built every day with effort, discipline, and a firm mindset, even when the heart is weary. And despite everything she had faced, she kept within herself small dreams that she never told anyone. Those desires that we push to the back of the drawer, waiting for the right day that rarely comes. Sometimes, while slowly washing the dishes, she imagined what it would be like to travel to a simple place, listen to the sounds of nature, or learn something new just for pleasure. On other mornings, while wiping the table, she would let out a brief smile, remembering old moments that still resonated with her soul. This was the Clara behind the scenes, the Clara no one saw, the same Clara her son would later call dead weight. And it's curious how life works, because those who looked at that woman only saw fragility but didn't see the silent strength she carried, strength built over decades of difficult decisions, losses, new beginnings, hard work, and a courage she didn't even realize she possessed. Tell me something. Do you feel that sometimes the world ignores the battles you've won just to get to where you are today? Comment below, in your own way, something like, "This makes sense to me," just so I know this conversation is resonating with you. Clara had a habit of placing a small flower in the center of the table. It was a simple ritual, but it revealed much about her essence. For her, beauty always resided in small gestures. And perhaps that's exactly what makes this story so intense, the hidden truth that, deep down, we all carry a version of ourselves that the world doesn't know, a version that remains alive, waiting for a chance to breathe. Now I want to delve even deeper into this story, because understanding who Clara was on the inside explains a lot of what will happen later. And believe me, there's something in this woman's journey that reminds us that life doesn't end when someone tries to diminish us. She had silent dreams, strong memories, and a discreet desire to prove, even to herself, that she still had value. And if you were to stop for a moment to think about your own cherished dreams, those that were set aside by haste or pain, which one would you choose to take out of the drawer first? Clara didn't know it yet, but the revelation she was about to experience would completely transform her journey. And in a way, it might also transform how you see yours. When Clara moved in with her son, she truly believed it would only be a phase. Losing some of her financial independence certainly affected her self-esteem, but she held on to that firm mindset that it's never too late to reorganize, take a deep breath, and try again. In the beginning, living together seemed peaceful. The house was noisy and busy, and Clara tried to adapt to every detail so as not to disturb anyone. She put her things away quietly, walked slowly so as not to disrupt the family's rhythm, and offered to help whenever she could, even when no one asked. But as the days went by, small phrases began to creep into her routine like invisible barbs. First, it was a, "You're getting in the way," said without looking her in the eye. Then came a, "You don't understand anything," as if age had erased all the wisdom she had built up throughout her life. One morning, while she was trying to prepare something simple in the kitchen, she heard from afar, "I already have enough problems." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a direct attack. It was worse. It was the kind of comment that hurts from behind, as if her presence had become a burden. And it's at this point in the journey that I like to observe the hidden truth behind human behavior. Sometimes, the emotional impact isn't in big arguments, but in the small acts of negligence that accumulate, the micro disregards, the silent judgments, the lack of care that slowly corrodes. Clara felt this every day, as if she were occupying a space she didn't deserve, and that, for someone who has always been in control of her own life, is devastating. Tell me something. Have you ever had the feeling of no longer fitting in a place where you thought you would be welcomed? If this resonates with you, comment something like, "I'm on this journey too," just to highlight the connection between your story and hers. And the curious thing is that, even hurt, Clara tried to remain gentle. She tried not to make noise, not to create tension, not to cause an impact, but the injustice grew inside her without her realizing it. Each phrase left a mark. Each impatient sigh from her son said more than 1,000 words. It was as if affection had been replaced by functionality, and she, unintentionally, had become a nuisance. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there is something powerful in the way family relationships can shape a person's emotions. Clara had faced losses before, but nothing compared to the feeling of being treated as someone dispensable within her own family. The home that should have been a refuge became a tense territory, full of painful revelations about priorities, selfishness, and decisions made without empathy. As the weeks passed, she realized that physical proximity didn't mean real presence. She was there, but not really there, belonged there. That difference, so simple and so cruel, began to weigh on her chest like a stone. And perhaps you understand that feeling. when the atmosphere speaks louder than words. And little by little, this woman who had always believed in the power of everyday life began to realize that coexistence wasn't just difficult, it was unfair. And this silent injustice was about to awaken in her, a decision that would change everything. The tension that had been building up in small fragments finally reached a point where it could no longer be contained within any silence. Clara was in the living room, folding a dish towel, when she heard the door slam shut in the hallway. Her son entered in a whirlwind of irritation she no longer recognized. He had arrived like this before, carrying frustrations that had nothing to do with her, but at that moment there was something heavier in the air, as if the hidden truth of everything that had been swept under the rug was about to escape. He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and, without any care, let the phrase fall like a stone. "You've become a dead weight." The impact was immediate. A silence so dense filled the room that even the clock seemed to hesitate. Clara, with the dish towel still between her fingers, slowly lowered her eyes, trying to maintain the posture she had learned throughout her life. It was one of those moments that freeze you inside. No tears, no screams, no defense, only a deep, human pain, the kind that spans decades of history, of sacrifices, of love given without measure. It's curious how a single sentence can dismantle everything a person believed themselves to be, and at the same time, how it can ignite something that was dormant, a kind of silent revelation. She didn't react. She didn't justify herself. She didn't say that she always gave her all. She simply remained there, motionless, feeling each word echo inside as if opening fissures she never imagined still existed. And it was precisely within this abyss that something began to change. A new perception, almost discreet but firm, took shape within her. That it's never too late to understand when a cycle needs to end. Now, delving deeper into the essence of that moment, it's possible to see how much this rupture affected Clara's mindset. Her journey was marked by resilience, by care, by a lifetime of trying to do the right thing. And hearing something so cruel from someone she had held in her arms became a kind of internal turning point. She realized that it wasn't just an insult, it was a mirror, showing how much she had been diminished over the days, the months, perhaps the years. A truth hidden in the cracks of their relationship. And this, in a way, makes us think about how certain wounds don't appear all at once. They accumulate in details, in loose phrases, in unfair decisions that shape emotions until, in a single instant, everything is forcefully revealed. As Clara slowly raised her face, there was no resentment in her eyes. There was clarity. That moment was the trigger for change, a change that was only just beginning. And it is precisely at this point in the story that her silent transformation begins to take shape, even if no one around her notices. Because certain decisions are born deep within the soul, at the exact moment when we understand that continuing as we are costs more than leaving. And it is from this wound that her journey takes an unexpected turn, capable of revealing much about starting over, dignity, and the impact of a choice made in silence. That night, when the house finally fell silent and only the distant sound of the wind filled the spaces, Clara sat on the edge of the bed as she did when she needed to organize her own soul. She held the dish towel that was still in her hands, as if that simple gesture were the last thread that bound her to what she had just heard. But unlike what anyone would imagine, there were no tears. There was no despair. What took hold of her was a kind of profound, almost serene lucidity, which only arises when the limit is irreversibly crossed. There, in the darkness of the room, she understood something she perhaps already knew, but had never allowed herself to fully feel. It's never too late to regain one's own dignity. And it's curious how certain decisions don't shout. They simply settle inside us as if they'd always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The hidden truth of that instant was simple and powerful. Clara decided. She decided she would no longer be a burden to anyone, especially someone she had carried in her arms for so many years. He decided he would no longer live in the territory of disrespect. He decided to start over, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. It was as if, suddenly, her entire journey had pointed to that exact moment, revealing that some changes don't depend on age, but on courage. As she observed the simple room where she slept, she clearly realized that there was no longer room for her peace there. Her mindset, so shaped by decades of patience, underwent a silent transformation. And when that kind of transformation happens, you feel it throughout your body, a mixture of firmness and fear, of impact and liberation. Clara took a deep breath, and for the first time in many years, felt that her future was not tied to that house. It was tied to the choices she would make from that very morning onward. There is something very beautiful in the exact moment when a person rediscovers their own worth. Clara realized that her entire life had been driven by care. She cared for her family, her work, everyone around her. But now she needed to take care of herself. And this revelation brings a powerful inspiration. The idea that new beginnings are born when pain finds purpose. She ran her hand slowly over the quilt, as if saying goodbye to something that no longer represented her. She understood in that instant that staying there would be allowing that cruel phrase to define who she was, and it wouldn't be like that. Because deep down, she knew her story still had chapters to be written. The decision was made. Tomorrow would be different. Age didn't matter, fear didn't matter. There was a strength within her that had finally awakened. Because it is here, exactly here, that her transformation begins to take shape. And this change will reveal much more about who Clara really is. Clara woke before sunrise with the feeling that something inside her no longer fit in the same place. The decision she had made the night before still throbbed in her chest, firm, silent, mature. She got up slowly, opened the drawer where she kept her few belongings, and began to separate what really mattered. Documents, a change of clothes, an old portrait that carried more meaning than appearance. She took almost nothing because she understood, at that moment, that the weight of the baggage was not in the things, but in the courage. And courage she had. She always had. She had only forgotten. As she folded the last piece of clothing, she murmured to herself that it's never too late to leave a place where the heart finds no rest. She left the house quietly, walking with slow but determined steps. The morning air seemed different, as if announcing a kind of freedom she was still learning to recognize. Clara walked to a community center, a simple place she knew only by hearsay. She pushed the door open hesitantly, but was greeted with a kind look, one of those looks that says, "You matter," even without words. There, among patient volunteers and unfamiliar faces, her journey began to transform. There was no luxury, no excessive comfort, but there was something that was more lacking than any object: respect. The volunteers perceived the fragility behind her calm demeanor and offered help without intrusive questions. Someone brought her water, another person showed her a bench to sit on, and a social worker carefully explained that there was a temporary shelter for active seniors, a space where people with very different stories could find mutual support. Clara listened attentively, absorbing each word, as if they were threads of a new emotional fabric being woven within her. She accepted the offer, not because she wanted to depend on someone, but because she understood that accepting help is also an act of strength, not weakness. This shelter was small, but full of life. There were people starting over after losses, others rebuilding relationships, some simply seeking a new chance to be heard. They shared experiences like people share bread, with simplicity and truth. And it was there, in that unlikely territory, that Clara recovered something she thought she had lost forever. Her voice, her own voice. She participated in conversations, recounted fragments of her past, listened to stories that deeply moved her, and realized that everyone carries invisible battles. She grew stronger, day by day, like a plant that receives light again after a long time in the shade. Those first days at the shelter revealed to Clara a truth that changes destinies. When someone is treated with dignity, the spirit is reborn. Her transformation began from the inside out. She woke up early, participated in activities, observed the intertwined stories around her, and felt that each encounter brought a revelation. What was once fear became drive. What was once silence became decision. Clara began to walk differently, to speak differently, to see herself differently. It was as if a part of her, forgotten for decades, had finally found space to breathe. because it is precisely in this welcoming environment that her true rebirth begins to gain momentum, and what follows further deepens this transformation. Clara began to realize, day by day, that the shelter was not just a place to pass through, but a turning point in her journey. In the first week, a volunteer invited her to a basic crafts course. At first, she found the table full of colorful materials, threads, and fabrics strange, so different from the practical life she had always led. But, little by little, her fingers loosened. Each piece she created carried a bit of a story that couldn't be put into words. While crafting small items for sale, Clara was also shaping a new mindset. She realized she could transform scraps of fabric into something beautiful and useful. This revelation resonated deeply. If a piece of fabric could gain a new meaning, why couldn't her life do the same? Soon, her creations began selling at community center markets. The money wasn't much, but the effect on her was enormous. She would return to her room with a discreet smile, feeling that her existence was once again generating value. The classes on coexistence and self-esteem opened internal doors that had been closed for years. In the discussion groups, she heard stories of abandonment, loss, and new beginnings, and discovered that behind many smiles, there were silent battles. She understood that she was not alone. Each story helped to rebuild the image she had of herself. She no longer saw herself only as someone who gets in the way. She began to recognize herself as someone in transformation, part of a network of people who were also trying to rise again after difficult decisions and deep scars. And perhaps what strengthened her most were the new friendships. People who laughed, joked about their age, treated wrinkles as maps of battles won. In hallway conversations and shared meals, she forged sincere bonds. People who called her by name, asked how she was, saw much more than just a lady at the end of her life. There, Clara felt firsthand that it's never too late to be truly welcomed, to find a place where presence is not tolerated, but welcomed. The routine was simple: waking up, helping with small tasks, participating in activities, setting aside time for crafts, listening to and telling stories. But behind this ordinary daily life, a profound reconstruction was happening in the background. The hidden truth was that each day in that environment was rearranging something within her. Her gaze became firmer, her posture more upright, her voice more confident. She was no longer the same woman who left her son's house with a bag in her hand and a heart full of silence. Something inside her had reorganized itself, and this changed everything, opening space for revelations yet to come. Given this quiet transformation, I leave you with a sincere question. If you could strengthen one area of your life today, what would it be? If this part of Clara's journey resonated with yours, write in the comments, in your own words, something like, "This makes sense to me," just to mark this turning point between you and your own story. Weeks went by, and something extraordinary began to happen without Clara even realizing it at first. Her handcrafted pieces, those she created with patience and almost therapeutic care, began to attract attention at local fairs organized by the community center. First, a woman bought a key holder, saying it reminded her of her mother's house. Then, a young man bought 2 embroidered cloths, saying he wanted something made by hands that know life. In a short time, the tables where her pieces were displayed began to empty, faster than she imagined. It was as if each stitch, each fold, each detail carried a kind of silent energy that passed through people. The money raised wasn't a large sum, but it wasn't small either. It was enough for Clara, in a month and a half of dedication, to achieve what had always seemed impossible: rent a small, cozy, simple room that was all her own. A space where she could place a flower on the table without feeling like she was getting in the way, where she could breathe without fear of judgment, where every corner said, "You belong here." And the most beautiful thing about this transformation is that it wasn't a gift from heaven, but a direct result of the courage she had to change her own path. For the first time in many years, Clara looked at herself in the mirror with genuine pride. It wasn't vanity, it was dignity. It was the awareness that her decisions had weight, that her journey had value, and that it's never too late to rebuild pieces that seemed lost. The hidden truth is that the woman who once heard herself called dead weight now walked with the posture of someone who understands her own impact on the world. She learned that someone's worth is not measured by the space they occupy, but by the roots they create. Invisible, strong roots, firmly planted within themselves. And here is the phrase that defines this phase of her life in such a profound way that it gives you goosebumps. She wasn't dead weight. She was a strong root. A root that sustains, that resists, that reinvents itself even after storms too harsh to describe. The new room became a symbol of this revelation. There, she organized her materials, placed a soft lamp on the small table, and hung on the wall the first embroidered cloth she made in the shelter, as a reminder that new beginnings can be born from the most unlikely places. There is something incredibly powerful in the moment when someone realizes that their worth doesn't depend on the validation of those who couldn't see it. Clara walked through the streets with calm steps, feeling that every decision she had made since that morning was blossoming. And deep down, she knew all of this was just the beginning of a journey that still held important revelations about freedom, identity, and inner strength. And tell me something. If you could change just one aspect of your life right now, only one, what would it be? Months passed, and Clara's life had found such a different rhythm that even the air seemed different. She woke up early in her small new room, put the kettle on the stove, and felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. It was impressive to observe, behind the scenes of her routine, how her transformation had taken deep root. The woman who once left home heartbroken now walked the streets with firm steps, a calm expression, and that inner certainty that it's never too late to reconstruct her own story. The impact of her own journey was visible even in the way she smiled at strangers, a gentle smile, but full of revelations about who she had become. And it was just when life seemed finally aligned that the past came knocking. Literally. One afternoon, while organizing her crafts on the table, she heard 3 short, hesitant knocks. When she opened the door, she almost lost her breath for a moment. It was her son, not the haughty man who had belittled her, but someone with slumped shoulders, a tired expression, and a faded gleam in his eyes. He seemed smaller than she remembered, as if the weight of his own decisions had begun to take its toll. Clara remained silent for a few seconds, observing every detail, his short breaths, his restless hands, his trembling voice when he finally said he was having problems, that things had fallen apart, that he needed help. He spoke as if he expected to find the docile and submissive mother he once was, the one who silently accepted everything. But he had found another person, a strong, serene woman, living, a woman, who had learned the hard way that dignity has no age and that no love survives healthily when only one person bears the responsibility for everything. This moment carries a truth that many people avoid seeing. Sometimes, life takes unexpected turns not to punish, but to reveal. Clara saw before her not only her repentant son, but the reflection of everything she had overcome to be there, whole. Her mindset had changed. The journey had reshaped her inner structure. She took a deep breath, with a look that mixed compassion and firmness, and said the phrase that would forever mark that relationship. Son, dead weight is someone who never tries to get up. There was no anger. There was no revenge. Only truth. A truth that had enough impact to pierce through any emotional defense. She said this with the calm voice of someone who finally understood that love also demands limits. Then, she closed the door. Not with violence, but with dignity. And this simple, gentle gesture was the most painful response he could receive, because it showed that she had won without needing to hurt, without shouting, without diminishing herself. Clara stood for a few seconds before the closed door, hearing the muffled sound of her own son's breathing on the other side. It wasn't triumph, nor bitterness. It was simply peace, a peace won with much effort, with many silent falls, and with an inner transformation that few people would dare to experience. That scene, so simple to the eyes of passers-by, carried a weight that only those who have been reborn after being broken understand. The hidden truth is that there are wounds that hurt, but there are choices that liberate. And Clara had just made a choice that ended a cycle without hurting anyone. It was a silent but complete victory. She returned to the small room she called home, placed the kettle on the stove, and sat at the table, observing her own cup as one observes a new chapter of life unfolding. It wasn't about rejecting the past, but about finally allowing the past to stop defining who she was. Deep down, she knew there was still much to reorganize within herself, many memories that still ached like loose ends. But she also knew, more than ever, that it's never too late to rebuild their own sense of freedom. What once seemed unattainable was now right there, between the steam of the tea and the welcoming silence of the morning. Clara's story reveals something many forget. Starting over at 60, 70, or 80 years, old is not only possible, it's transformative. It's as if life, instead of ending, takes on a new form, a new path, a new impact. Clara discovered this not because someone taught her, but because her heart demanded it. And this mentality of rebirth doesn't depend on age. It depends on the audacity to say enough when the world tries to diminish your value. While drinking her tea, she thought about everything she had experienced in the last few months. The abandonment, the shelter, the trembling, hands during the first social interaction classes, the handicrafts that started timidly and now provided sustenance for a new life. Each part of this journey rebuilt a piece of her, and it was beautiful to realize that, in the end, it wasn't the pain that defined her, but the decisions she made based on it. Decisions that revealed strength, revealed light, revealed deep layers of courage she didn't even know she possessed. Clara looked at the door as if bidding farewell to a chapter that will never return. She knew her son still had a long road ahead, and that perhaps in the future there would be room for a different kind of conversation. But now was not the time for her to carry anyone's burden. Now was the time for her to exist fully, with the dignity she always deserved. Life is often hard, but it also often rewards those who insist on getting up. And perhaps this story has touched something deep inside you, a memory, a desire, a wish to restart some area that has been forgotten. Tell me, what dormant dream still lives within you, waiting for the right moment to come true? And if you've made it this far, perhaps this story has resonated with a part of you that's also seeking strength, healing, or simply a fresh start. So it makes sense to tell you this calmly. If this type of narrative embraces you, inspires you, or reminds you of what truly matters, consider subscribing to the channel. That way you can continue walking with me through these stories that warm, provoke, and sometimes change us from the inside out. And before you go, leave a like, not as an obligation, but as a way to show me that this conversation made sense to you. Also, if you stayed until the end, leave the phrase in the comments. I'm with you until the end. It's our silent way of knowing who really lived this whole story with me. Now, if you'd like to continue with this same energy, there's a video here that beautifully complements this reflection. Click and follow along there. The journey continues.